This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
This podcast is made in collaboration with the Jewish Journal. Check them out at jewishjournal.com. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, israelnationalnews.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, visit 2njb.com/donate. Recently, President Trump and his team unveiled the much-awaited deal of the century, a plan to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This immediately led to a media frenzy. Several obvious opponents, including the PA and the Arab League, rejected the plan flat out. Others joined in their rejection, claiming that it completely ignores the Palestinian side. On social media, a meme went viral comparing the plan to the one laid out at the Oslo Accords, claiming the two to be identical. We figured we should try and figure this out. What is actually in the plan? Is it fair? Is it feasible? Is it really the deal of the century? So to help us unravel all of this is a good friend of the podcast, Dr. Michael Oren. Dr. Michael Oren was Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office, member of Knesset in the Kulanu Party, and served as the Israeli ambassador to the United States in the years 2009 to 2013. Oren also taught history at the Hebrew University and Tel Aviv University.
So funny. I didn't, actually.
I
don't know where they get this stuff from.
Every time.
I actually didn't. I actually taught at Ben Gurion University here, but okay.
But it's on Wikipedia, you know that.
I know, Wikipedia is wrong.
Okay, so according to Wikipedia, you taught it history.
Okay. You know.
They're altering history, ironically.
Imagine that. Something's inaccurate on the internet.
But you were a visiting professor at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown.
I was indeed.
Okay. So he is the author of several books, both fiction and nonfiction, which we've discussed here on the podcast. We are honored to be joined by you to talk about the deal of the century.
Great.
So thank you so much.
But pleasure to be here again. Once again, I hope I have the record for interviewing with you guys.
And the man who was called the Israeli Dan Carlin? What's his name?
Dan Carlin. I love Dan Carlin. I listen to everything he's done.
By one
he's
of our
terrific.
listeners.
Yeah.
He's terrific. Thank you. Oh, that's a great compliment. I love that. Maybe the best compliment I've ever got. That he's really Dan Carlin.
So what do you say? Is it the deal of the century?
The good news is the century's pretty young. You've got a long way to go.
That's good. It is
if
a
it came out in
deal.
1999, it would have been a different story.
It's a deal, and we are in a century.
Yeah, so. Let's begin with this. First of all, by a little bit of bona fides here. I have a rather unique perspective on this because I think I'm one of the few people in Israel who has accompanied this process from its origins in 1993, from the Oslo process when I served as an advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, up to the present. And I was involved at an early stages, and I think a critical stage in the formulation of the deal of the century, of the Trump peace plan. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting perspective. Let me begin by saying that there's much talk about the Israel lobby in the United States, but very people don't talk about the peace lobby. The peace lobby is very powerful. It includes think tanks, includes significant parts of the American administration, particularly the State Department. University campuses, publications, and the media. All of them promote peace, but it's not just peace in a general sense. It's a very specific peace. The guiding principle is that everybody knows what a peace between Israel and the Palestinians would look like. Now, nothing could be further from the truth, because nobody knows what a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians look like. There were certain sort of fundamental nostrums which you had to subscribe to in order to be part of this lobby. One was 67 borders, sacrosanct. The two-state solution would be based on the two-state borders. Jerusalem would be divided. There would be a solution for the Palestinian refugee problem. There would be a solution for Israel's peace security needs. That the Palestinians didn't recognize Israel as a legitimate permanent state, no problem. That the Palestinians wouldn't give up on the right for refugee return, no problem. The Palestinian Authority would continue to pay terrorists in jail who had killed Jews and actually increase their payments per Jews killed, no problem. That they educated their youth to murder Israelis. That was no problem.
No problem. What do you mean by no problem?
That was that. I'm saying this is what they assumed, that you could just sort of shrug this stuff off.
Okay.
And this was the peace lobby. And the extraordinary thing was that that this lobby remained so important, so powerful, so influential in Washington, and not just in Washington, in European capitals as well, in spite of 25 years of consecutive failure.
Yeah, it's a wonder we never.
No, it's someone should write the book on this. I actually know.
If only we've known a historian who writes books.
It's a very depressing book, but it's amazing that when the Trump peace plan came out, all of the sort of the guiding lights, the luminaries of this peace camp, the peace lobby came out and attacked it, as if they could actually summon a history of success, which they can't. The history is of unremitting failure, which was always accompanied by an excuse: if only we had 2 more weeks of negotiations, we could have closed the deal. Ignoring the fact that the Palestinians have rejected every two-state solution, going back to 1937. To the first Peel Commission report of the British, 1947 under the UN, and then of course the Clinton plans, the George Bush plans under Ehud Olmert, then Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, rejecting it, and usually, almost invariably, with one exception, 2008, rejecting it with violence and large-scale violence, which is also extraordinary.
So maybe you can delineate for us what's in this plan. Maybe we can break it down.
So where's it different?
Yeah.
To my mind, and there are reservations, and I have key reservations. To my mind, this is the most realistic plan I've seen since 1993. This is the signing of the Oslo Accords. This is the plan that most reflects realities on the ground. Well, first of all, it reflects a significant shift of strategic thinking in the region. The Palestinian issue, which used to be the regnant issue for the Middle East. The assumption was that if you solved the Palestinian issue, you could solve every problem in the Middle East. I never forget the first national security advisor of President Obama, General Jim Jones, would say, if God came down and said, if you could solve one problem in the world, I would say to God, the one problem I wanted to solve was the Israeli-Palestinian problem, not hunger in Africa, okay, not disease, okay, but the Israeli-Palestinian problem, because they sincerely believed this notion of linkage, that if you solve the Arab-Palestinian problem, you solve the problem of Islamic extremism, you solve the problem of Iran, you solved all these other problems. I mean, this was myth in high gear, but I can't tell you how deeply seated these myths were. The myths died hard. They died in the Arab Spring of 2011. They died through the achievement of energy independence of the United States from the Middle East. The Iran nuclear deal. There's a series of milestones toward putting this myth to rest. And now you have an Arab world which seeks an open alliance with Israel against Iran, which seeks access to Israeli innovation.
Sunni Arab world.
True indeed. They seek access to Israeli innovation, because they know that the era of fossil fuels will come to an end, and they have to be able to use their wealth in a way that can lead to development for their countries, and we are the key to that. Mm-hmm. And they are unwilling to let an unelected Mahmoud Abbas is in the 16th year of his 4-year period.
Practically a dictator by now.
He's not just that; he's a corrupt dictator. This is a leadership that has stolen hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in foreign aid, especially American aid, from its own people. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I got, by the way, that was also overlooked by the peace by the peace lobby in the United States. Mahmoud Abbas, he's corrupt, but
that's what we have.
That's what we got, and in a way, it's rather prejudicial, deeply prejudicial against the Palestinians. Well, what do you expect from the Palestinians? They could do better than this, and so. We're in a different place. So the Trump peace plan acknowledges the fact that the geopolitical situation has shifted, has changed fundamentally in the Middle East. It understands that this administration has gained tremendous amount of credibility, street credit, if you will, in standing up to Iran, particularly the latest action of doing away with Mr. Soleimani. Is extremely important for the peace. People in the peace camp don't understand. If you want to advance peace, you cannot, in the same breath, support the Iran nuclear deal and support peace, because nobody in the Middle East will trust the United States that upholds the Iran nuclear deal to be an honest broker. This won't.
No one in the Middle East, or the Israelis won't?
Well, I think the Israelis and when I said the Middle East, the Syrians will trust them. The Iranians will trust them. But I'm talking about Israel and the Sunni Arab world will not trust an American leader who is reconciling with the Iranians and providing the Iranians directly or indirectly with hundreds of billions of dollars. No one's going to do that. And that also wasn't internalized by this peace lobby. So as for the deal itself, realistic. There would be no realistic deal that could demand the uprooting of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Israelis. There is no deal that would allow the Palestinians to retain security control over Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and that includes control over airspace, control over X-band, electromagnetic band, control of the Jordan Valley. None of that was compatible with Israel's fundamental security needs. It just wasn't going to happen. There was no peace plan that was going to demand the redivision of Jerusalem. It wasn't going to happen. On the other hand, there was no peace plan that you could advance that wouldn't provide a pathway to Palestinian statehood, that wouldn't provide some type of territorial contiguity for the Palestinians, semblances of sovereignty, pride, and economic development was very, very important, and some type of Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. So the plan itself is very, very realistic.
Right of return was never in the question.
So the right of return was going to be addressed by earlier peace, including peace negotiations that were conducted by Ehud Olmert and by Tzipi Livni, which provided for the return of several thousand Palestinian refugees to Israel. But that would have opened the door. I think that would have been disastrous. And this doesn't. And it insists that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a permanent, legitimate Jewish state endowed, the Jewish people endowed with the right of self-determination.
Will they ever?
No, probably not. I mean, it has been my experience. I participated in the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians. It was now 11 years ago. It lasted 6 hours. And in those 6 hours, gentlemen, I probably learned more than I learned in 6 years of university. And one of the things I learned was that the negation of the existence of a Jewish people, the negation of a Jewish people that has that right to self-determination, is fundamental to Palestinian identity.
It's worth mentioning when we hear two-state solution. When they say two-state solution,
they never say two states for two people. Ever.
Exactly.
Ever.
To them, it's one Palestinian and one state
yet to be conquered.
No, it is. It can be called Israel, but no, it's not. But the point is, it doesn't have to be Jewish according to them.
And to his credit, I will say that President Obama also recognized this finally, because he didn't start off there. He understood that while the United States and Israel said two states for two people, the Palestinians only said two states because they didn't recognize a Jewish people. So think this through to the end. Game it with me. You have two states. One of them is recognized as legitimate. The other has no legitimacy. It's transient. It's not a permanent state. So you'd never find, and I mean not one Palestinian leader who would ever say two states for two people, who would ever say that the two-state solution was a permanent and legitimate solution, and you'd never find a Palestinian leader who would say end of claims, end of conflict. In other words, you reach a two-state agreement, and then the conflict goes on.
And a Palestinian who I never met or heard of a Palestinian who gave up the right of return.
Or it's not going to happen. Again, I don't want to belabor that phrase, but it was not going to happen.
And I think, to me, the right of return equals my annihilation.
Of course.
That's not that obvious to everybody.
But that was just one aspect of it. It was also educating children. It was also not recognizing.
Right, but this is the fundamentals.
It's also paying terrorists in jails. What's the message for paying terrorists in jail? So it's upholding an idea that terrorism, killing Jews, is essential for Palestinian identity. Now, so these were all non-starters. So in the deal of the century, it addresses all these issues. It doesn't try to shrug them off as previous peace plans did. It takes them head on and said, okay, no right of return, no funding terrorists in Dale, no education to young people to destroy the state of Israel, an end to all that. And that is crucial.
That's why it's considered pro-Israeli, I guess.
Yet, all of that press, what was the word you said? Brouhaha, the reaction to the frenzy overlooked the very significant Israeli concessions that were made in the plan. So what did Israel concede?
Territory in the Negev.
Oh, but let's get to that. First of all, land swaps. Mm-hmm. The notion that Israel would compensate the Palestinians for land that would be annexed in the West Bank with land in sovereign Israel. And I must tell you, from an insider's viewpoint, we rejected this wholeheartedly during the Obama years.
Yeah.
Okay?
we presume it will never get to that, I think.
Who knows? I'm just saying the idea is there are new parameters.
Because that's one of the last levels of the plan, right?
But it's there, and we conceded it. Israel conceded a connection, a rail connection or otherwise, between the West Bank and Gaza. That was far from a consensus issue among Israeli decision makers. We conceded the fact that the Palestinian Authority would ultimately return to governing Gaza. And that was a hotly contested issue among Israeli policymakers. Many people were very comfortable with the, divide and rule type of situation where you had Hamas in the West Bank or another entity in the West Bank, and Hamas in Gaza, another entity in Gaza, and another entity in the West Bank. It was comfortable for the state of Israel not to have a Palestinian entity on both to the east and the west of us. Many concessions. East Jerusalem concession. The Palestinian state, a huge concession for the more extreme Israeli right. And I was shocked at some of the expressions of elation that followed in the immediate aftermath of the publication of the deal of the century by settlers and other elements on the Israeli right. And I thought to myself, okay, this is going to end. They're going to wake up, after a night of binging and wake up with a headache, and the headache's going to be the Palestinian state. And that's happening right now. I don't know what would have happened if blue and white had succeeded in bringing the Trump plan to a vote in the Knesset, and prominent members of the Likud and other right-wing representatives would have to get up and vote for a Palestinian state. That would have been very, very difficult. So there are significant concessions in there. And there are sticking points. There are 15 settlements that are sort of stuck in the Palestinian areas. There's the question of annexation. And when the night of the press conference, I turned to my partner and I said, "Oh, that annexation is not going to come about."
Now,
not
Ever?
for a while, not forever, but now, because the key to this whole plan is Saudi acquiescence, and if the Saudis aren't on board, it probably won't stand a chance. Mm-hmm. And if Israel were to turn around and annex large segments of the West Bank the next day after the announcement of the deal, the Saudis would be frightened away. And
because in Israel, some
so
people
I'm not
said
surprised at all that Jared Kushner and others pressured the Israeli government not to proceed.
Here,
with
some people
annexation.
said now or never. Like, let's do it right away. The momentum is in our side.
Well, clearly, there would have been short-term game. I don't know about the long-term game. I think there are many factors at play here, not the least of which is keeping a close and productive relationship with this administration, which may well win a second term. And then we have other issues at stake here, particularly the Iranian
Let's see
issue.
if there will be a Democratic candidate at all, because
They've had some technical difficulties, I know. I had I can't say I had a major role in the formation of this policy, but I think I had ultimately, in retrospect, an influential role. I was called to the White House several times to discuss my ideas about peace, and I think there were two approaches that were internalized. One was, and this is going back several years to the first months of the administration, I said, basically forget the Palestinians. Why? Not because I'm cruel or patronizing to the Palestinians. I realized that now for decades upon decades, the Palestinians were A, incapable of signing on a dotted line, B, and B, probably would never want to do it, and C, they didn't have a leadership that actually had the legitimacy to sign on a dotted line, even if they were capable and willing. Because who is Mahmoud Abbas? Okay, again, he's unelected. They won't even stand election for Northern West Bank. So what does his signature mean on a piece of paper? So I said to the Trump team, I said, any peace process that is predicated in advance on Palestinian acceptance is doomed for failure. It is, for the reasons we talked about. Palestinians aren't going to give up the right of return. They're not going to give up the refusal to recognize the state of Israel. They're not going to do it. So you're basically starting off on a no-win situation.
So does that mean that this is just a statement on the
No.
American side?
I said practically, you aim for 80% at least of Israeli public, and I think that's gotten that. And the other partner is the Sunni Arab world, in particular the Gulf countries. And if you convince them to get on board, then you create a situation where economic aid and investment is flowing into the West Bank. Maybe a younger generation of Palestinians sees that that they are invested in, that they have a dividend from peace, and that they can maybe get rid of some of these corrupt rulers if they could, and see that this offer provided a future for their children and grandchildren that otherwise they would not have. Okay, so it was a very practical approach. That's why I say that has been eternalized.
The long game. I mean, that's the very, very long game.
If aid and investment would start flowing tomorrow, it wouldn't be such a long game. It's a game that could start literally, tonight. Again, but you have to have the Saudis on board. Really be.
But you're talking about the next. I mean, raising the next generation to be conducive to peace.
If people have to see that there's a benefit, that there's that there's a horizon. Also, offering Palestinian statehood was a horizon. Okay, you strive for it. The second issue I spoke about was based on an article I published some years ago in the Wall Street Journal called "The Two-State Situation." I've since upgraded it to call it the two-state reality, and it was based on the radical notion that the whole debate surrounding two states is actually a moot point, because there are two states. And anybody traveling on Israel's number 6 highway, Concessions, will see a big Palestinian flag flying there. There's kind of a government there. There's kind of a police force there. It collects taxes. It's in charge of its education, as we know, unfortunately, but it is. It's recognized by 130 nations of the world as a state. So this article argued that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, you got something to build here. And rather than asking both sides to do things that they can't do, like redivide Jerusalem, like uproot Israelis from their homes, like forcing the Palestinians to recognize the Jewish state, why don't we ask each side what they can do and proceed from there? So a very realistic approach. And I think that if I would have envisioned the map of that article, the map looked very, very much like the Trump map. Very much like the Trump map, with some of the same provisions in it. So I if anything, I have a sense of, I have a certain sense of accomplishment here. I think it's a good plan. I have, both in my former diplomatic position and even after I got out of politics, have been meeting with foreign representatives, and I urge them, particularly the Europeans, not to reject it out of hand. I've been in contact with advisors in the Democratic campaign, telling them not to reject the plan out of hand, because you can disagree with some things. You can say, the Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem should be bigger, incorporate more Palestinian neighborhoods. You can say that the Palestinian state should have somewhat larger borders. Okay. But don't reject it. There's so much to this plan that is worthwhile.
But it's kind of an awkward situation. I mean, we're trying to get everybody around to accept this deal when we recognize the fact that the people on the other side of the table are rejecting. Like, to say,
but they were always going to reject it. That's the thing. The rejection was built in.
But
so you had to proceed.
Sorry. The thing, if I understand the plan correctly, the beautiful thing about it is that the more they reject, the more we gain, because they can reject, but we can still do more and more steps on our benefit, right? Is that...
Well, you are, in this sense, that as with so many other areas, whether it be NATO, China, other trade areas, President Trump has changed the rules of the game. And he came into our issue, the Israel-Palestinian issue, and fundamentally changed the rules of the game. And what were they? One, if in the past Palestinian leaders left the table, as they did repeatedly, they got rewarded. They got more aid. They got an embassy in Washington. They got a flag on the embassy. Every time they walked away, they got a reward.
Counterintuitively.
Well, if you're a parent, you think it's stupid. It's like having your kid trash his room, and then you come in and give him $20. Is he going to trash? Is he going to trash the room again? Yeah, he's going to trash the room again. But basically, what they were doing with the Palestinians. And really, I mean, Trump had that faculty of coming in. This is madness. He says every time they leave the table, I'm going to punish them. Whether it's cutting off aid or dismantling UNRWA. We celebrated the moving of the embassy, the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. We thought it was a great gesture. But if you looked at what President Trump was tweeting, he says, I'm doing this not to reward the Israelis, but to punish the Palestinians for not coming to the negotiating table. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that principle, you leave the table, you get punished, is built in. Second issue for Trump, the deal maker, is everybody who comes to the table has to make concessions. And look, we made concessions. I think I've made that point. We have made concessions. The Palestinians are going to have to make concessions, which means that they're not going to get their maximum demand for the Palestinian state, which has absolute sovereignty on the 67 borders. Not going to get it. Okay. And the third principle, and this is a crucial principle, I think, is that if in the past parties, particularly the Palestinians, would reject an initial draft of a peace plan and say to themselves, oh, we'll wait for the second and third and fourth drafts because the drafts keep on getting better and better for us. Now, under Trump, every draft is worse.
For them.
For them. You eject one,
For
you're
example,
not going to get the same deal.
For example, can you...
Well, I'll give an example. If you say, okay, you can start off with a Palestinian state that has a big capital in East Jerusalem. No, you walk away from it, you're going to get a smaller capital. Now, you think like a businessman. This is how businessmen think. It's the business model. It's not the diplomatic model.
It's game theory.
Yeah. It's the way President Trump conducted real estate deals, which is, hey, I'm offering you a deal. It's good for one day. You come back tomorrow, it's going to be a less good deal.
So what are the chances that they actually, like, even if they are tiny, what are the chances the Palestinians
pretty damn tiny
come around?
Pretty tiny. Not this under this leadership. I would be very surprised. But maybe some future leadership.
Well,
it doesn't mean we have to sit passively. And I know from dealing, there was a sense here that the Trump team was close to the Israeli extreme right in its worldview, and it wasn't true. They cared very much about the future of Israel as a democratic and Jewish state, and how to preserve that. And if you look at this plan, I think it goes a long way to realizing that goal.
Mm-hmm. So, like we mentioned before, if you hold, there was this kind of meme going around where they would hold up the two maps of the Oslo Accords and this map and say, oh, Rabin offered it and he was.
Rabin never had a map. I'll trust you. And I think that, to tell you the truth, this map looks like something that Yitzhak Rabin could have accepted.
So tell us kind of the difference of what the Oslo Accords was offering and what this.
Oslo wasn't offered any maps. There was no maps. The first maps come out with an agreement between Abu Mazen and Yossi Beilin, which looked, not all that much different than the maps that were put out by John Kerry, 20, 25 years later. Or the Geneva Initiative maps didn't look so much different than the maps that were drawn by my friend David Makovsky at the Washington Institute. He had a series of maps, and later he went to work for John Kerry. None of those maps bore any serious relationship to what was happening in reality, and that's just what was happening on the Israeli reality in terms of the settler population, our security needs. What can I say? Abu Mazen is alive today because of the Israeli army. We kept him alive. What are we going to pull out? He'll be gone in a day.
We also gained from the Oslo Accords some things.
We gained a Palestinian security apparatus, which cooperates with us and occasionally does a good job. We can't. Another thing we could not concede in any agreement was the right of hot pursuit. That is totally inconsistent with the notion of a sovereign country, but we couldn't give it up.
Like in Fauda, if you have a terrorist in the territories, we go in, we get him.
The Palestinian Authority was not going to stop terrorists who were non-Hamas. If they were Tanzim, if they came from Fatah, they weren't going to stop them. We have to stop them.
But the fact that we can collaborate on getting in there with them,
sometimes not. Okay, but we have to reserve that right. We have to reserve the right to control the airspace. We have to ensure that the Palestinian state does not have the ability to sign diplomatic agreements with foreign states, like Iran. That's all we need. A strategic alliance between the Palestinian state and Iran. We can't have that. Now, none of this accords with the Weberian notion of a sovereign state. It doesn't. So you can call it a state, you can call it autonomy expanded, but whatever you want to call it, and maybe they have to use. There's a rhetorical battle here because it's not a complete state, but you can't call it less than a state because you have to be able to offer something to the Arab world.
Can we play a game in which we imagine they say yes, and we end up agreeing to a Palestinian state? Now, let's say there's a Palestinian state, and you do have the law of return to the Palestinian state,
you don't.
Right? To the Palestinian state.
You do not.
They can't. It's when in the end of the plan, when they have sovereignty in a state, you can't tell them
refugees from Kuwait and Jordan.
Yeah, you cannot tell them not to bring.
Them anyway. One of my earliest involvements in the peace process actually precedes the Oslo Accord by almost a decade. I started in 1982 when I was an officer in the civil administration in the West Bank, and there was a plan that we advanced to bring in Palestinian refugees from the Lebanon War in 1982, and they completely turned it down. The leadership in Hebron, Nablus, they said, if you bring in these people, you'll have a riot here. So they're not about to absorb millions of refugees from the Arab world. They're not. But in theory, I think that would not be allowed under this accord.
Because
It's
it would
destabilizing.
hurt us.
It's destabilizing. It's you wanted some bring in, hundreds of thousands of so-called refugees. I have to say so-called refugees because Palestinian refugees are the only refugees. Fifth generation refugees. Okay.
You can't control who comes in there.
Well, we'd have to.
ISIS or whatever.
It'd be very difficult, very dangerous for us.
So
we're aware of that. By the way, even under the Obama administration, we were very clear that there would not be a carte blanche for the return of refugees, even to the Palestinian state. There'd be limits on that too. For that reason, we're not suicidal. We're not. That's all. We're not suicidal.
When you say we,
There may be certain people, in certain parties who are suicidal, but we are talking about suicide. And I hope you understand that what I'm saying now is not
40-50% of Israelis are into that.
Or suicidal.
Suicidal? Is that a statistic?
That's
is
an
that being a
estimation.
poll?
Educated estimation.
That, what I'm saying here is not left, right, up, or down. It's based on historical experience, imperative evidence, and texts that I've reviewed for the last almost 30 years.
I don't think it's a matter of suicidal. I think it's just the fact that sometimes people don't necessarily have the foresight to see the consequences of certain decisions. So,
Definitely.
They have their priorities.
And I remember prominent Likudniks back in, actually from Kadima already, back in 2005, saying anybody who said that a missile will fall from Gaza, will hit Ashkelon is crazy. Okay? Is insane. Literally insane. Oops. Got that wrong.
So I want to go back to the comparison of the Oslo to this, because I think one of the points that's been shared around is the idea that Rabin offered these things, whether or not there was a map. Yeah, whether or not, but the idea was that he offered these things. He put out a hand, and he was kind of fried alive, and Bibi makes the offer, and he's kind of glorified as the wonderful peacemaker. And I'm wondering if this was an easy move for Bibi, or do you think that, like you mentioned before, Concessions, was this an easy win for him, or did he actually have to
I'm sure there were prolonged negotiations behind the scenes. He's taking a hit because he can't annex, and he needed the annexation for the settlers and others who are opposed to the Palestinian state. So this was sort of compensation for the Palestinian state. You're recognizing this Palestinian state that may not come into being, but I'm giving you, 30% of the West Bank tomorrow, Judea and Samaria, with 85% of your population in it. That was a major compensation. It hasn't come about. It's yet to be seen. I think, having worked with the Prime Minister, I know that he tends to see the entire picture. That he's not just looking at this peace agreement. He's looking at his relationship with this administration and how they're going to advance on the together in tandem on two of the paramount goals of the State of Israel, and that is opening relations with the Arab world, establishing formal relations, particularly economic relations with the Arab world, and that's happening, and how we are going to counter the Iranian threat, and that I think is working.
What are realistically, what's going to happen now with the plan? Take us to the next year, 2 years.
Well, again, I have to put myself in the position of someone like Jared Kushner, something that people on his team are going to say to themselves, okay, how do we move on this? The way we move on this is getting the Israeli government to sort of hang fire on the annexation. We don't have a long time. First of all, they are facing an election also in the United States. Let's not forget they have their electoral schedule. We have to see who's going to win the Israeli election, what kind of government we have. Benny Gantz, though he embraced the plan, has also qualified his embrace by saying he will work in tandem with the Jordanians and others. Now, the Jordanians are going to reject this, so it's kind of an oxymoron saying I'm going to accept it, but work in tandem, but only if it works in tandem with the Jordanians. And the administration has to see who's going to win here. But I think they move on this.
If someone will ever.
Yeah, if someone will ever. I think they move very much on the Gulf and Saudi support for the plan, and begin the first stages of economic assistance and open relations with the State of Israel, because they also have to show the Israeli public that there's a dividend here. There's what to be gained.
So let's we've talked a lot about the deal, but maybe like a rapid fire round of political questions from around the world.
We don't have
right
much
now
time.
we have a couple of hours before the Senate and the state in the states votes on impeachment. Any thoughts on that?
I think in their heart of hearts, many of the Democratic leaders sort of regretted the fact that they had to go to impeachment. It became politically impossible to say no to impeachment, but I don't think it advanced their cause very much. It was also very early. In other words, the vote on impeachment is happening so much in advance of November that people will be apt to forget it by then. And I don't know if it convinced all that many people who might have voted for President Trump but now won't because of the impeachment. And what has it done? It may look ineffectual. The Democrats have some serious difficulties. The Democratic Party has swung significantly to the left.
Who will win?
I don't know. I was very good. I must tell you, well in advance of 2016, I predicted that Donald Trump would not only be the Republican candidate, but that he'd win for the presidency. And I was sitting with a group of prominent Jewish Republicans in the Senate and the Knesset, and I told them this. And there was a audible gasp that went up, and I explained why. Because the debate in the United States is no longer between left and right, but between establishment and anti-establishment. And Trump was the most anti-establishment figure you had. I think it's still about anti-establishment, and that's why I think that Bernie Sanders has a serious chance of being the Democratic candidate. And so I know I would insult him profoundly if I said that he is the most Trumpian of the Democrats. And
he is the most Jewish of the
Well, yeah, the conventional wisdom in 2016 was that there were three major candidates. It was Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton, and only one of those candidates did not have Jewish grandchildren.
Yep.
Leave you to think about that.
Yep.
I'll leave you to think about that. He's Jewish, and it's going to be that would be a major challenge for the state of Israel on multiple levels were he to win. But I think that he has gone this far as a 70-year-old Jewish socialist is saying a lot about politics in America. I just think that politics on the Democratic side have become so fractured that Democrats have to respond to 40 different ideas or constituencies. Some of them are irreconcilable.
Yeah.
A good example of what happened with the death of Kobe Bryant, where a woman reporter from the Washington Post came out and posted something about the accusations of rape that were made against him some years ago, and she was threatened with dismissal and excoriated and threatened for coming out and posting this. So Democrats, on one hand, have to respond to constituencies like, say, Black Lives Matter, but they often have to respond to the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. And what happens if they're not reconcilable? Yeah. Difficult. The Republicans have a much easier job. They don't have to reconcile so many sometimes potentially conflicting constituencies. So it's difficult. And in order to be sort of a bona fide Democratic candidate today, you have to subscribe to a number of, again, I don't want to belabor the term, nostrums. Of sort of almost a catechism of beliefs. You have to do it on the Republican side too. For example, whether it's pro-life or say pro-Israel, or there are a number of issues there. But somehow I think that they're much more easily reconciled than on the Democratic side.
So to bring us back home, maybe for one last question, what about the upcoming elections? Any
So
predictions?
I serve as an analyst on a number of media outlets in the United States, and every week I'm asked that question. Every week I say the three words that no analyst ever wants to say.
Fourth elections upon us. That's
know.
4 words.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't think anybody knows. Anybody tells you. I listened to Victor Lieberman today on the radio saying there won't be a fourth election. I don't know if there's going to be a fourth election. I look now that after all of these very significant diplomatic achievements by Netanyahu, the Trump peace plan, bringing Na'amah Issachar home from Moscow, possible relationship with the Sudan,
yeah.
which, by the way, in my eyes, may be the most significant of them all, because Sudan
does
is
that really speak to the average Israeli? I mean,
Yeah.
seeing
Na'amah
peace with
Issachar, yes.
No, Na'amah Issachar, yeah. But
it's amazing. The Sudan is where all the missiles come from in Gaza. That's where how they get the missiles they
Also-
fire out of Gaza from Iran. They all get into Gaza
Also-
through Sudan.
You have Sudanese refugees or work immigrants.
There's immense strategic benefits to this if it happens.
Yeah.
all of this so far, according to the last poll I saw, amounted to a bump up of 1 seat for Netanyahu.
Yeah, then to cancel that out, you
the
have
big
the
problem-
charges that were finally
And listen,
brought
but it's
against
also
him.
early again. It's early.
The big problem
We'll remember
this
this in 2
time-
weeks in our news cycle, you know.
Yeah.
is that Ben
Right.
Gurion, who's the extreme right party,
Yeah.
he runs, and he burns between one mandate and 2 mandates, and these are crucial. Also, when Bennett joined the right-wing party to the big right-wing party, he lost votes of secular right-wing Israelis. That also, I think, could be a mandate.
And
so
this
you have
morning,
between
Lieberman came
2
out
and 3.
and would not deny the possibility, would not reject the possibility that he would join Meretz in a government.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a number of wild cards, but right now the blocks, forget what the parties are. The blocks are neck and neck, and I don't see any major change there. It was my hope.
You don't miss politics?
Do.
So
It was my hope that the Trump plan would serve. Would serve as a glue.
wait.
You want to go back to that?
Yeah.
Let me just the last thought. And that
Okay.
it was my hope over the course of 2 years
Mm-hmm.
that the Trump plan would serve as a glue for the formation of a national unity government. This is an extraordinary story. I don't know if you have time to hear it. Going back almost 2 years, I went to the administration and I said, listen, you better put this down in the summer of 2018 because you got Ramadan in June, you got the Jewish holidays in September, and then we're going to elections. And there's this crazy chance that if we go to elections, we won't be able to form a government, in which case you're going to be put into the spring of 2019. All right. And then you're going to hit Ramadan, the Jewish holidays again, and then you're going to be in your elections. You're going to be in 2020.
Little did you know.
I never thought we'd go to the third round of elections. But it was my hope, even back in 2018, that this would serve as a way of bringing some of the Israeli center together around a peace plan. That did not happen, and I think that hope was really put to rest by the indictments against Netanyahu, and to create a situation where blue and white could not join in the government with an indicted prime minister. That was the timing there was absolutely crucial. Do I miss politics? Sure, I miss politics. Someone said politics is a passion. It's also a bit of an addiction, but there's a deep satisfaction, from service. It's what people don't understand about, say, service in Knesset.
And chilling in Florentine is also.
Yeah, that's what I do. I chill in Florentine, but I live in Florentine and Jaffa, which is the coolest neighborhoods on the planet. But when you're not ridiculously voting till 3:00 in the morning on these filibusters, you know how to say filibuster in Hebrew?
Filibuster.
Filibuster. You are
like a
helping
booster
citizens.
seat.
Citizens are lining outside your door with all sorts of problems, and there's a tremendous satisfaction. You could really help them, and I miss that. I miss that connection with Israel. And you don't have that sitting in great bars in Florentine.
So
Not in the same way.
there might be a day where we see Michael Oren on a ticket again.
Might be.
Never
Okay.
say never.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, and with that scoop, we can wrap things up. What can we plug before we go?
Okay, so in September, I have 2 books coming out
Wow.
before the end of 2019.
2. One
Yes,
wasn't enough.
No, 2. I have a 2 book thing. I tell you why. The short story is that the short version of this is that under Israeli law, I was prohibited from publishing books, but not prohibited from writing books.
Yeah.
So I get up every morning. I write. I still get up every morning, 5:30, and write. The first book is coming out in September. It's called The Night Archer and Other Stories. It's a collection of about 60 short stories, which will, how should I say, will
Amazing.
knock your socks off.
That's awesome.
Unlike anything you've ever read. Some of them
That's
very
incredible.
Israeli, some of them
Not-
very
so
Jewish.
some fiction.
Noxious. Well, I hope I'll talk to you about that then, but when it comes out.
We'd
in
love,
September.
Yeah,
I'd love
definitely.
to
Yes.
have.
And the other book is
It's a novel.
Oh, okay, great.
It's again also a Jewish novel. It's called To All Who Call in Truth.
Amazing. So look it up, guys.
And if you want to have Michael for a book tour,
Yep.
it's just hit
It's
him
coming.
up in America.
I have a website,
Mhm.
Michael Oren, www.michaeloren.com.
MichaelOren.com. Oren is OREN,
Yes,
guys.
indeed. Still.
Okay, battery's running low. We have a collaboration with the Jewish Journal, jewishjournal.com, and Arutz Sheva, arutz7.com.
No, IsraelNationalNews.com.
IsraelNationalNews.com. And we accept donations. Please help us out. Go to 2njb.com/donate and
Yes.
help us. And that is it. Thank you so much, Dr. Oren, for
Thank you
coming
so
As I say in
again.
Florentine, but
Bekif. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.